I'm Jim Hassinger. Again, what a nice crowd. Thank you for coming. This is a beautiful morning, and we really appreciate your attendance here. My first goal today is to get things started, and then to turn this discussion over to our leadership. And in the room today, we do have leadership and professional staff, as I said, from all levels of government, public, private sector, from federal, state, local, at the county, municipal level, and people from all over the region who have volunteered their time to make each of their communities a better place. And that's what we're here for. Now we are working to create the region's new plan for transportation and development. It's a plan meant to look long-term and near-term at things that we need to be doing to handle both urgent situations and to create and keep the kind of region that we want to live in going forward. And our SPC elected leadership from Chairman Larry Maggi, our Vice Chairman, Chief Executive Fitzgerald, our Secretary, Commissioner Tony Amadeo from Beaver County, and all of our leadership have encouraged and supported this commission's work to create a new regional plan and a new kind of regional plan. The creation of this plan uses special expertise both in this region, in all the sectors, and taking advantage of best practices from around the country, as well as our own innovations. And more than that, I think it pays special attention to public engagement for better understanding of our issues and our opportunities as a region. And our preparation this summer had a lot of help from consulting firm Michael Baker Jr. International and their team. I want to recognize and thank them for that work, and along with MetroQuest consultants in designing a public online survey that we're going to talk about today, as well as significant help from our region's member government planning directors in particular. This really is an appropriate place for this meeting. We're on the banks of the Monongahela River in downtown Pittsburgh, where it meets the Allegheny River, and water from all parts of the region comes together and contributes to one great river that flows westward the Ohio. And Des Moines alone today, as I understand it, contributes quite a bit, contributes 19,000 cubic feet of water per second going past us. That's impressive. That's a significant fact. It's more than average. It's been a lot more at various times. A couple of quick notes about the staff support that I mentioned for you today. We have our staff at the tables with packets of materials as they are needed. When we have discussion exercises, we want you to take the lead, but know that we are here with the resources that you will need. Our staff directors will help manage the process for you. But we are not here to tell you what the plan priorities will be. That is up to you. This room is full of people. And thank you again. We're all here because of that special expertise or civic commitment, all bringing something to this discussion because you do care about this place. In fact, as the crowd in the room today shows, there are already a lot of people interested in this plan and care about this region. So many, in fact, that when we had to close a registration, we worked with YouTube to live stream this event so it could be seen by anyone who's interested, and it will also be available afterwards. But today, we are doing Regional Planning Live on YouTube. We are on now, and people can watch. So if you know someone who couldn't make it today and wanted to, or came to our webpage after we had to close off this registration, send them to spcregion.org as we get started, or to YouTube and just do the search on SPC Forces of Change, and they'll get to the live feed. But then, of course, please silence that phone, and so we can listen to each other while that thing's going off. And we can talk to each other across the tables. That's what we're really here for today. So now I want to turn the mic directly to our elected leadership. So please welcome SPC Chairman Larry Maggi. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Jim. We do have a little logistic problems. We need a light up here. So most of you presenters who come up, maybe bring your cell phone up and put a little light on your notes. So just a little heads up. But good morning, and thank everybody for coming. It's great to see such a room full of people to be here for this important issue. Here today at the SPC Regional Plan Workshop, we will be hearing about all the great work that has been done over the past year in preparing for the forces of change that we need to address as a region. And as we all came in today, our different ways, 79, 28, Parkway, Smithfield Bridge, along the Mighty Mon, Allegheny in Ohio, we realized how important planning is. And we're right at the epicenter of it. And I think that makes our mission today even more so important. But we'd also like to thank my fellow commissioners, both elected and appointed, who are here to help out today by introducing the work done by each of the expert resource panels and then emceeing a series of table activities centered around the forces of change. The idea for the expert resource panels came from an assignment the SPC Executive Committee asked our member planning directors to take on to come up with a new regional plan process that both engaged the public and the private and expert opinion. The planning directors worked with a special task force of people from each of the member jurisdictions to identify best practices from regional commissions like ours around the country. And one of the key recommendations of the planning directors was to convene experts of the pressing forces of changes that we need to address as a region. As chairman of SPC, I convened a chairman's workshop in March for the commissioners, and we heard presentations about the key forces or trends from recognized leadership on these topics. Following our briefing on the pressing trends in the areas of technology, demographics, environment, economy, and most important, funding, we charged the staff to invite expert panels on these subjects. These panels identified potential impacts associated with each one of these forces and then developed a series of strategies to enhance positive impacts and turn them into positive impacts and to turn negative impacts into positives for this region. Now, our agenda for today. This morning, each of the forces of change will be introduced by one of the SPC commissioners who participated in the discussion on the expert resource panels. There will be a brief video that will explain the forces in more detail, and we will then ask you spend some of the time at your tables considering each one of these forces and how it could impact the region and rank them most urgent to least urgent based on how urgently you think action is needed. Now, after your discussion at the tables, we will show you the most recent results from the online survey, which has more than 1,000 responses so far. So to compare with what you have said here today and came up with. Now, during lunch, we will be hearing from Jason Beskey, co-author of the new book, Suburban Remix. His book discusses how suburbs can use growing demand for the advantages offered by mixed development patterns and walkability to renew their appeal as places to live, work, play, and to invest. After lunch, we will conduct another table exercise where you will assign weights to the initial draft strategies through a simulated allocation exercise. Now, to get the day off started, to get it off started right, I will now turn it over to Commissioner Leslie O'Shea from Butler County to introduce economic forces of change. Commissioner O'Shea. Make sure you got your phone and your light.
I'll just muddle through.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. And it is really an honor and a pleasure to work alongside such distinguished leaders, and it is an honor to see the turnout here today as we envision what the future of our region will be. As Commissioner Magi did say, that the forces of change that we're going to discuss first is the economy, and I think nothing touches closer to home and for the residents of our region than the economy. But the forces within that economy certainly have changed over time, and the opportunities and challenges that presents are always changing, and we need to be able to maximize the opportunities and rise to that challenge. And I can certainly say for us in Butler County, in my short life, it is amazing to me the change that I have experienced from the time that I was a child to now in the economy in our county alone. And as I look back over history, knowing that we were built originally really on oil and an oil economy, and the small towns that were built, that grew up around the oil boom at the time. And to see that today come full circle, I almost get goosebumps, come full circle now to natural gas, and watching how that is now booming in that same kind of way, but certainly with different, in a different manner than what we saw in the days of oil. And the legacy dollars and investments from oil that were left behind and still exist today, and how now we can see the investments that have potential for far into the future of natural gas as well. And so that left behind, a really incredible petroleum industry, I think, in the northern part of our county. But again, we've all been driven in this region by manufacturing, by steel, by mining, and a lot of that obviously has changed over time. And so now what becomes important for all of us is that sort of brownfield redevelopment and repurposing of a lot of those manufacturing sites that existed. And we're actually experiencing that in our county right now as we speak. Also, what becomes important is as our southwest part of the county grew, certain things pop up now like logistics. And I know that when I went to college, and we're not going to talk about that date, but logistics never was considered I didn't even know what that meant back then. And as the county with, the only county with both a university and a community college, we took a group of students to the university not too long ago, and they listed all the various majors. And I have to tell you, there was stuff on that list that I had no idea what it was. So that's how fast it changes, like waves coming in on the beach, and unfortunately, perhaps like what's happening in North Carolina as we speak. So the need to recognize those forces and be able to identify those challenges, as we said, and emerging opportunities is certainly crucial to our success. So what are those most pressing forces of change within that economy that we should be planning for? So that's the question that was asked of the expert resource panel. And right now, we're going to look at a short video on the economy as a force of change and what forces that expert panel identified that could have influence here in Southwest PA. It starts with, I think, a brief overview of the forces and then focuses on the economic forces and their potential impacts.
What comes to mind when you think about the future? How will technology change? What about the economy? What will happen now that millennials are growing up and baby boomers are retiring? How do we adapt to a changing climate? How will we pay for things? SBC is developing the new regional plan for southwestern Pennsylvania with a focus on forces of change in our region's future. Forces of change are high-level external forces, whether global, national, or regional, that could have a significant regional impact now and in the future. SBC formed expert resource panels with local, regional, and national experts who agreed on 5 forces of change most relevant to our region: economy, demographics, environment, funding, and technology. The expert panels met to review these forces of change and identify the most likely impacts to our region, determine how certain these impacts are to occur, and whether they will be positive or negative for our region's future. The expert panel identified economic forces of change as workforce, technology, infrastructure, energy, and vacant and abandoned properties. Potential workforce impacts include education and skills, productivity, increased compensation, meeting demand, and increased company costs. Potential technology impacts include education and training needs, workforce, infrastructure needs, brick and mortar versus digital retail, healthcare, and mobility. Potential infrastructure impacts include utilities, connectivity, efficiency, reliability, and business attraction. Potential energy impacts include environment, job competition, decreased energy costs, increased jobs and job demand, infrastructure demand, stability and longevity, and indirect impacts. And finally, potential vacant and abandoned property impacts include revitalization, redevelopment and reuse of spaces, crime, population loss, and lower tax base.
There was a lot in that video packed into that little 2.5 segment. So actually now what we're going to ask you to do is we want to hear from you now based on that. And at your table, I think the leaders at the table will distribute an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that lists these forces of change in the economy. And we're going to identify now how urgently we think that region should take action to address these particular forces. So we want your table to spend some time considering those forces and how they could impact the region, and then rank them from the most urgent to the least urgent. And then following that, we're going to compare that, I think, to the public survey results that were taken, to the community engagement survey, and see how closely aligned we are. And so we'll have about 10 minutes, I think, for this exercise. So I'm up here thinking about all those things, wondering how in the world we're going to rank that in 10 minutes, but we can do this. So the staff is going to time that, and we'll let you know when that time is up. And so good luck, ready, set, go.
2 minutes left. You can start to wrap up the discussion. 2 minutes.
All right, ding, ding, time's up. Okay, so let's look at what the online survey results are, and then we'll take a look at to see if your rankings, how close your rankings are to the online survey results. Okay, there we go. Oh, that's better. Thank you. That's clear. So number 1 was aging infrastructure, 2, jobs, which I assume is workforce, 3, technology, 4, vacant properties, and 5 is energy and natural gas. So, is that different from your table's ranking? I know it's different from our table's ranking a little bit. So I think Lou's looking for a table. Who has a number 1 rank that's different? Does anybody rank something different for number 1? There's one back there and up here. We're going to have somebody come up and tell us why.
Our group ranked workforce as the number 1 challenge, which I believe is called jobs here.
Okay.
Everybody that we talk to in the industry, in any industry, is having trouble finding employees, and it's just getting worse. And to us, that was the number 1 issue. Anyone that wants to start a company or relocate a company is always going to be looking at workforce as their number 1 criteria as well. So
Right.
That's why we chose workforce.
Okay. And the other table down here that had a different one, did you have workforce also, or what did you have as one? Just curious. Was yours different? Yeah. You had technology first. Okay. Just curious, can we have you step to the mic for a minute and tell us, somebody? I'm sorry, Lou, I totally blew your whole thing out of the water. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. Thank you. Okay. So that's different. All right, so.
Just quickly about technology. I mean, obviously, when you looked at the bubbles, you had workforce in there, and you had other things in there that related to the other items driving the economy. So we looked at it at our table, what was driving the economy and moving it. So maybe we looked at it a little bit differently, and that's why technology moved up.
Well, interestingly enough, that is a fabulous segue because our next force of change is actually technology. And so to tell you a little bit more about technology, I'd invite my friend and colleague, Commissioner Dave Coder from Greene County, to join us.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks for paving the way so we know what we're doing here today. The next force we will be discussing is technology, and I just want to add, when I first attended my first SPC meeting back in 1996, the piece of technology I carried was a pager, so we've come a long way. Technology is a part of our everyday lives. Due to technology and advancements over the past 20 years, the way we communicate with one another, shop for goods and services, and the type of job training required for our workers are changing rapidly. Self-driving cars have the potential to change everything from the need to own a private vehicle. I just got to pause there for a second. I've read this, these are prepared remarks, and I read it several times, and it just comes to me that Post-Gazette advertisement, I'd sooner chew broken glass. So it's just the way we move freight, the way we pay for infrastructure, and the way we plan for development. As we heard in the previous report, the need for workforce training is a recurring theme. As additive manufacturing grows in the region, it will require training of workers for these types of jobs. The same holds true for the automation of certain industries. We will need to ensure that workers get the training they need and that they can get these new jobs. We need to plan for all these advances to ensure that southwestern Pennsylvania economy remains competitive and adaptable to changing conditions. The provision of broadband internet service to Greene County is critical to our economy and our children's education. According to the Federal Communications Commission's 2016 Broadband Progress Reports, Greene County is one of the 34 counties across the state that has less broadband access than the national average. Also included in that list from the southwestern Pennsylvania region are Fayette and Indiana counties. Recently, Governor Wolf launched the Pennsylvania Broadband Initiative, a dedicated effort to provide high-speed internet access to every household and business in the Commonwealth. This effort includes a dedicated office to manage the efforts and a broadband investment incentive program, which offers $35 million of financial incentives to private providers bidding on a service areas in the FCC Connect America Fund Phase 2 auction. The FCC auction uses a competitive bidding process to award $1.98 billion of subsidies to providers. This could potentially transform the landscape of rural broadband internet in Pennsylvania. Providing high-speed internet or broadband service is the first step to ensuring that the rural communities of southwestern Pennsylvania are not left behind in this changing data-driven economy, and our children are given the same educational opportunities as those in more urban areas. Now let's look at a brief video on technology as a force of change, potentially impact.
The expert panel identified technology forces of change as additive manufacturing, broadband, mobility as a service, automation and artificial intelligence, and connected and autonomous vehicles. Potential impacts of additive manufacturing include increased efficiency, workforce development, supply chain impacts, and improved competitiveness for small businesses. Potential broadband impacts include rural development, impacts of 5G speed increase, safety and privacy, infrastructure management, need for government support in rural areas, public-private partnerships, and increased telecommuting. Potential impacts of mobility as a service include infrastructure planning and investment, public and private roles, workforce development, regulation and policy, equity, and congestion and air quality. Potential impacts of artificial intelligence include increased efficiency, job loss in traditional industries, public and private sector use, and cultural shifts in public investment. Potential impacts of autonomous vehicles include safety, congestion, land use and sprawl, maintenance, liability and insurance, public sector revenue, infrastructure and communications infrastructure, and workforce development.
Okay, thank you. We're going to do like we did before. We'd like to hear what you think. At your table, you should have a sheet entitled Technology Forces of Change. How urgently do you think the region should take actions to address these forces? We'd like you to spend some time considering the forces and how they would change or could impact the region, and rank them from most urgent to least urgent. So we'll get started. I think we have about 10 minutes to do that. So, and Lou and the SBC staff will give you a hand, right? You're good. Let's get her started. Is that good, Lou, so far? Good? Not enough people were listening for my broken glass joke, though. Not enough people were listening. That's my clue that they weren't paying attention. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
All right, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So let's wrap up the rankings. Dave.
Okay, time's up. Time's up again. Let's look at our online survey results again. Ranking first was broadband, second was robotics, 3 mobility as a service, 4 additive manufacturing, and 5 self-driving vehicles. So how does this online results compare with your table's rankings? Who would like to come up to the mic and tell us about it? Lou's running around with the mic.
Who has a different ranking? Oh, they want to talk about it.
There we go.
You're off the hook. Please come up to the mic over here.
I am Jack. I'm a Ross Township Commissioner. Actually, our group had a very, very spirited discussion about our #1 pick, which is mobility as a right rather than a service, and how mobility issues affect workforce, affect training opportunities. In the North Hills where I live, fairly white collar, but still we had issues that people could not get to the universities because there was no public transportation. We have employers desperate for people, but the workforce cannot get to the jobs that are available. So we felt very, very strongly about mobility being #1 and how it fed into the region's infrastructure needs and many of the other things that we've already talked about this morning.
Thank you. Is there any other comments? Grab up to the microphone, please.
Okay. I'm from West Findlay, Washington County. Our phone comes out of Greene County. And when you go talking that broadband, we can't even get that.
Right.
Because the phone don't work weeks at a time in that town. Mm-hmm. You got senior citizens trying to call 911 for help. They can't get it.
Right.
That's why broadband phone company
Absolutely.
#1, and that needs to get straightened out real bad.
Absolutely, especially in these rural areas.
Yes.
You don't even have phone service, so we appreciate that. Yeah,
Thank you.
That's absolutely right. Okay, next. Okay, all right, then we're going to move on. To ensure the region is prepared for the technological forces, it will require significant effort from both the public and private sectors. I'd like to turn the program over to Commissioner Maggi from Washington County to discuss forces of change.
Thank you, David. Okay. Thanks, that warm welcome of applause. Thank you very much. Jeez. My friends from West Findlay Township, they're correct. They have a hard time getting 911. The fire departments and the police departments have a difficult time to get service out there. So it really is a problem in a lot of places. But I would like to, our next issue could arguably be, and I'm going to turn my light on because they seem to have dimmed it again, could arguably the one, well, everybody will pay the most attention to, and maybe, I got it on blink. That pay the most attention to is probably one of the most important is funding. Funding, that's always the basis of all our projects, and I think this is very important. Hopefully there'll be a spirited conversation and debate at the table and come up with some great order here. Now, again, we'll be talking about funding, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, at current funding levels, the Federal Highway Trust Fund will not be able to provide funding for the states or improvements on the nation's highways and the transit system after 2021. And this is due part on the reliance of the gas tax as vehicles are becoming increasingly more fuel efficient and advent of hybrid and electric vehicles. The current mechanism is not providing the funding or the revenues necessary to adequately maintain or enhance our current transportation infrastructure. Now, state and local governments are all being forced to play an increased role in funding our infrastructure. The Pennsylvania state government helped fill the gap by passing Act 89 in 2013. It is uncertain how local governments will come up with the matching funds, and that's a very important key. Local governments are struggling with this and to maintain and sustain their locally owned systems. Stable, reliable funding for infrastructure is critical to the quality of life and the economic vitality of southwestern Pennsylvania. Without predictable long-term funding commitments at all levels, it will be more difficult to invest in new projects such as new transit services, further development of our regional trail networks, and projects that increase capacity, improve the reliability and safety of our roadway and transit systems. Now, in Washington County, for example, the discussion of funding is relevant and very timely for us there, particularly in regards to the northern section of the county, Route 19, US 19, Interstate 79, where we come into Allegheny County. This area is experiencing rapid growth and residential growth, and it's really becoming a burden on the local government. And the increasing demands on the public infrastructure, the capacity, and the reliability is becoming very strained. Now, additional mobility options such as public transits, walking, and biking trails are needed to provide the quality of life issues that's so important to keep our communities healthy and our area residents healthy. These options also help ease the burden on the roadway system. So, what are the pressing funding forces of change that we should be planning for? Let's take a look at the short video on the funding forces of change.
The expert panel identified funding forces of change as changing role of national, state, and local government, lack of financial resources and how to pay, role of public and private sectors, social equity, and lack of public education about funding. Potential impacts of a changing role of national, state, and local government include local funding and matching funds, modes are one system in integrating funding, learning to leverage, dedicated funding source for public transit, demand for alternative mode projects, diminishing federal role, state funding flex, and dysfunctional legislative process. Potential impacts of a lack of financial resources and how to pay include new revenue sources, change in federal share, introduction of alternative funding, reduced spending power, regional taxes and local legislation, state fund update, and system barriers. Role of public and private sector potential impacts include private funding for associated development, availability of public-private partnerships, sector outreach for project decisions, bullpen for ready projects, broader use of public-private partnerships, flexibility in project funding, and education for competitive value. Potential impacts of social equity include transportation options and service, accessible infrastructure, equitable tax structure, addressing underserved population, and funding distribution. Potential impacts of the lack of public education about funding include private sector, advocacy, how to bundle state grants, and the public.
Okay, now we've done it a couple times before. We want to hear what you think, and at your table, again, you have an 8.5 by 11 sheet that is titled Funding Forces of Change. We went through how urgently do you think should take action to address these forces, and we'd like you to spend some time considering the forces and how they could impact the region and rank them most urgent to the least urgent. And just a reminder that each table has come to a consensus on the ranking, and record your results on a single sheet. What did I do? Everybody's. Okay, got 10 minutes.
2-minute warning. 2 minutes left.
Okay, time's up. Everyone, time's up. We're going to close her down. And I guess we're going to go to our results. And the survey says, now you guys over 50, remember that, right? Richard Dawson, Family Feud. So how did this online results compare to your table ranking? Big difference. Do we have somebody who has a change, want to come up and talk? We've got my left is the microphone.
Hi, Laura Ludwig with North Fayette Township. I'm the spokesperson for my table. We had a really tough time with this one. I feel like a lot of these are intermingled and intertwined. We really felt like we knew everybody was going to put how to pay as the main issue, but we really thought that the changing roles and also like the roles of the sectors are like come first, and then that's where you get to how to pay. So it kind of like creates the problem of the lack of resources. So we put changing roles as number one.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, this is a very important part of what we do. Without funding, we don't do these projects. So we have someone else who has somebody else wanted to come up.
Hi, my name is Marcy Johnson. I'm a spokesperson for my table. We actually picked public awareness because think about it, the best way to get change is to educate people to go to their legislators because the legislators aren't going to do it. We have to get people to understand the issue and to get them to make change happen. And we think if we could do that, we could solve the funding issue.
Very well said. Very accurate. And we can have one more who has a differing opinion. This young man is jogging up to the stage.
Hi, I'm Matt Mihalik. I'm with the Breathe Project here in Pittsburgh. So our group talked about this, and we decided that social equity should be the number one because the funding sources and how to pay, it comes from lots of different places it needs to be stitched together, but what this region really needs to focus on in setting priorities for which projects to advance and how to stitch those funding sources together to address which projects should be done. So that's why, and we have a long history of a lot of social inequity throughout the region, rural areas versus urban, interurban areas, and so that's why we thought social equity should be like a fundamental lens to look at all of these sources for moving things forward.
Interesting. Very good. I bet that was a spirited discussion at that table, huh? Okay, Lou, is that it? We moving on. Okay, now it's time to turn it over to Amy McKinney. She's the Lawrence County Planning Director. She's going to discuss environmental forces of change. Amy?
Look at that. I know now. I just turned 40 this year, so I kind of need the light, I think, so. Yeah, that's perfect. It is really dark up here, though. Here, we'll go right here. Just don't move. Okay. Okay. Thank you guys for being here today. We really appreciate it. My name's Amy McKinney, and I am introducing the next force of change, which is the environment. Southwestern Pennsylvania's natural resources are the region's most important asset. Our forests are a critical natural resource that are essential to the overall ecological functions and environmental health of the region. These areas are home to an abundance of wildlife, some which are threatened and endangered. They provide goods such as timber and food, ecological functions such as carbon storage, nutrient cycling, water, and air purification. And they also serve as recreational areas. Major river systems and their tributaries provide aquatic habitat, ecological benefits, recreational opportunities, drinking water supply, transportation, and economic benefits to the region. Agricultural land is a significant resource for our region with over 10,000 farms. Agricultural land through federal government conservation programs has become an important resource for land conservation and wildlife habitat. Pennsylvania's Agricultural Easement Purchase Program and County Agricultural Preservation Boards have helped preserve farmland throughout our region. In 2016, Lawrence County updated their county comprehensive plan, and we titled it Focus Lawrence County. In our plan, we identified the need to coordinate stormwater management efforts and to provide model green infrastructure solutions for our local municipalities. This was a high priority action that we as the county decided we would help lead or provide assistance to. Some other high priority actions also included assisting our municipalities with the preservation of the farmland and developing a countywide environmental advocacy board. These actions are examples of the core objectives identified in the planning process to promote the sustainable living communities in Lawrence County. What are the most pressing forces of change within the environment that we should be planning for? We're going to take a look at another short video, and in there, it'll on the environment as a force of change, and what topics the expert resource panel believed have the potential to influence southwestern Pennsylvania.
The expert panel identified environmental forces of change as natural resources, climate change, water, energy, and land use and development density. Potential natural resource impacts include biological diversity conservation, equity and health issues, physical character change in the region, non-attainment, coordination of development with natural resources, extraction tax, economic benefit, conservation and preservation of critical open space, industrial sources of pollution, and air improvement due to natural gas. Potential climate change impacts include increased high-intensity precipitation, increased extreme temperatures, increased flooding, unknown impacts and better understanding, increased disease vectors, increased landslides, coal mine release and subsidence, and population migration. Potential water impacts include utility legacy problems, poor water quality, increased stormwater, accelerated runoff, flooding, and loss of life and property, water quantity, and matching sources with users. Potential energy impacts include economic impacts of exports, increased natural gas usage, regional energy plan, boom-bust cycles, electric vehicles, renewable rise, increased spills, and increased natural gas production. Potential impacts of land use and development density include transportation investments in walking, biking, and transit, exceeding natural capacity of the land, regional coordination for sensitive areas, sustainable development requirements, regional competitiveness, municipal fragmentation, and loss of open space.
Okay, I think we all know the drill. You all have your 8.5 by 11 paper at your table with your group, and we're going to have you guys look to rank the areas we just talked about for where we think the region needs to address from most urgent to less urgent. You guys ready? 10 minutes.
2-minute warning. It's the 2-minute warning.
Okay, guys, time's up. Papers and pencils down. We're going to take a look now at the online results. So in order, we have water, land, air, climate change, and energy. Does any table have anything different than what's listed on? There we go. There's one table there. Lou?
We already did your table. This table over here? Okay. Please, whoever's going to do it, look up to the mic.
Just give her the microphone. She's walking.
Hello, my name is Janae Smith, and I'm the delegate from our table. We chose land as the #1 priority. Oh, then I don't even need to explain why. We just talked about sustainability and the intersection between people and their place and how, where their space is, how land can be best used to help grow the region. And that's what we made a priority.
Thank you. Any other table? There, we got the hands flying, Lou.
Go ahead.
So we chose natural resources, which I think is the air. Is that correct? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So natural resources, we had a really hard time with this, and I think everybody probably did. We had 1A, 1B, 1C. And the reason why we flipped this is because we felt like water was really water infrastructure, and water infrastructure is a kind of known issue and is being dealt with in many ways, but in many ways the natural resources are the challenges yet to come, and a lot of that has to do with the land use, which was our #2, and those two things specifically related to industry, transportation, material movement, manufacturing, et cetera, could be our biggest challenges with regards to natural resources, air quality, et cetera. So.
Okay, we have time for one more, right there.
Yes, my name is Daryl Rapp. I'm on Borough Council in Swissvale. And we very quickly came to a conclusion that climate change would be #1 and land use #2. We felt that the others were in many ways kind of subsumed under both the land use that was talked about as well as climate change. And by changing policy, addressing and focusing on climate change and land use, that a better use of natural resources, energy, and water would kind of follow from an emphasis on improved land use and addressing climate change. And we were thinking about a lot of this being driven as part of implementation, but implementation is policy. And so policy undergirds all of what we've been talking about. And the thing that jumped out from one of the prior topics was the dysfunctional legislative processes. And to me, that, and I think that's become our favorite go-to, the dysfunctionality of policy making.
Thank you. Thank you guys for the feedback on the environment. I am now going to turn it over, and we're going to talk about demographics. And I'm going to turn it over to one of my counterparts, Jason Ragone from Westmoreland County Planning.
Well, my wife would be mad at me if I didn't correct Amy. My last name is Ragone. All the kids' coaches are always calling my kids Ragone all the time, and she always goes like this. And I said, it's just your married name, and what do you think I feel like? First of all, let me start off with thanking SPC and Jim and the staff for taking on this project. I think that these kind of planning initiatives are vital in order to be able to develop strong guidance for our region. I'm going to talk a little bit about our own in Westmoreland County, that process, but I did want to make sure that we did thank SBC, the leadership there, the board, the staff, so on and so forth. Number two, I'd also like to thank my planning directors, my colleagues that really encompass the planning directors committee within SBC, and hopefully we were able to get this process started and we're able to come to a conclusion with a strong plan as we move forward in southwestern Pennsylvania. Now, my job here today is to talk about demographics. And before I start, I'm just going to start with a statement. And it was basically the bottom tab on the Pittsburgh Business Times back in July. And it basically said at the bottom of the paper, there will be 35,000 people leaving the workforce every year until the year 2025. The challenge is, do we have that many people coming into the workforce to be able to replace those? And I think we already had conversations around the table today talking about the importance of businesses trying to find people to fill jobs. Back in the day, I say back in the day, it just seems not too long ago that we have to create jobs all the time, and that's very, very important, quality jobs. But I guess the question is, do we have the people to fill those jobs? So the point of demographics and having that discussion, I think, is vital. And I think, quite frankly, is probably the most important aspect of this plan as we move forward. So let's look at our last force of change, demographics. Why is demographics identified as a force of change? We've heard how over the last 10 years, the region's population growth remained flat or to slightly decline. Also, that the region, when compared to 15 other benchmark regions, has the lowest percentage of residents under 18, the second lowest percentage of residents between the age of 18 and 64, basically our workforce, and the highest percentage of 65 and over. All of these demographic trends, while not unique to our region, we're seeing many of these same situations in the Northeast, are more acute locally and have serious short-term and long-term implication for us all. Nowhere is this more important or apparent than in Westmoreland County, and I say to you that as the planning director in Westmoreland County. We think that this issue is so important that our county's new comprehensive plan, which is to be released here within the next 30 to 60 days, which is titled Reimagining Our Westmoreland, is almost singularly focused on demographics. Westmoreland's population is prominent concern for three specific reasons. It's decreasing, it's aging, and it's lacking in diversity. The county's population, with the aging and declining, what does this mean? What are the implications to this? This means we have fewer workers, as we talked about, in the future to fill those jobs and promote economic growth. We also, what does this mean in terms of tax generation, whether that is in income or sales and on property taxes? What does this mean to housing stock with a decreasing population? And what does this mean to our transportation system? So again, I think demographics as part of this plan is the basis for what a lot of the other decisions to be made. We do have growth in pockets in the region, but if you look at the MSA statistics over the last 30 years, it's continued to step down or to stay flat. Also, the implications to school districts. We're building facilities that maybe are built for larger enrollment. So what does that mean for our schools? So all of these things are very, very important. The county's population in Westmoreland County is also homogeneously white, 95% in Westmoreland County. Let me give you some more statistics. In the MSA area, it's 86% white. National average is 61%. So by having and lacking in diversity, is that something that needs to be addressed? Welcoming a more diverse population serves as an opportunity for growth and entrepreneurship. For example, CNN reports that immigrants are twice as likely to start a business as a U.S.-born citizen, and Fortune magazine reports that Black females are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. Population growth and retention is the result of a combination of several diverse factors. We recognize there's not a singular solution to address population decline. Well, there is one. We all just start having more kids. Now, I have 3 kids. I know my friend out here, Alex, has what, 5, 6 kids? Making kids is actually fun. You'd think that we'd all do a little bit more of it. I know paying for them is not fun, but all right, this is going to be on YouTube, correct? All right, let's get back to what we're talking about here. So anyways, we are focused on demographics. And quite frankly, what we've realized in Westmoreland County is we can't solve the problem by ourselves. This is a regional issue that needs regional solutions. And we've been talking a lot about that when we've had our public engagement process and our focus groups, very similar to what we're doing here in terms of focus groups and larger group discussions. We have to solve this problem or address this issue as a region, not necessarily as individual communities. That being said, I think I've probably spoken enough and ad-libbed enough off the script. So let's turn the video on and talk about and hear a little bit more about forces of change in demographics.
The expert panel identified demographic forces of change as jobs, land use, transportation, and population trends. Potential job impacts include an aging workforce, living wage, higher education accessibility, wage equality, job retention, misalignment of skill sets, and destigmatization of jobs without a college degree. Land use potential impacts include density, multi-jurisdictional coordination of development, equitable economic development, and regional facilities. Transportation potential impacts include regional transit coordination, transportation technology, accessibility of transportation, misaligned funding priorities, regional human service coordination, and mismatch of transportation and jobs. Potential impacts of population trends include diversity, poverty, natural increase, aging, rural-urban migration, and intra-regional relocation.
All right, so before you go into your exercise, as you've done with the other 4, just want you to kind of keep in mind, demographics. What does it mean? I guess looking on the other side, how do you impact those? Are we building the kind of communities that people want in the future? Are we talking and communicating about all the values that we have and all the assets in southwestern Pennsylvania? Are we developing the towns? Are we building the right transportation systems, not only for what is needed, but what is also desired? So those are some things to keep in mind as you go through the exercise. I guess at this point, go ahead, and once we complete this exercise, we'll, I guess, be moving towards lunch.
2-minute warning. The 2-minute warning.
All right, if I could have everyone's attention so we can get wrapped up here. So time is up. So if we could, I think that the actual online information is shown on the screens. Let's see how they break down. Number 1, getting around, which would be, I guess, transportation. Number 2 is jobs. Number 3, population, well, it said trends, changes. And then 4 would be land use or development patterns. Do we have any volunteers? We have a volunteer back here to talk about how theirs was different. Mike.
Well, it's still morning, so good morning, everybody. Yeah. My name's Mike Storms. I'm representing our table. We thought that jobs was number 1. And the reason we thought that was that people, we feel, come to an area because of things like cost of living, what they have to do in terms of resources, entertainment, and so forth. But what keeps them here and what allows you to expand is having jobs. So if you don't have a job, everything else we thought was basically secondary.
Okay, great, thank you. Do we have any other volunteers? One in the back.
So our table chose development patterns or land use as number 1. So we talked about how in terms of development, there are often 2 economies in terms of people and or place. And so having more equitable policies in land use and development, I think would address a lot of that, and then considers the population trends, and a lot of that follows.
Okay, great. Do we have, I know I'm the last person up here, so I control the mic, so if we want one more, anybody want to volunteer that has a different perspective? Over here, please, sir.
I'll be brief because I think lunch is coming. But we had jobs, and it's not just about having to fill those jobs, but our region has, I believe, a really unique opportunity to create jobs. Because of our educational powerhouses. So there's a real opportunity here to create new wealth and attract younger folks. So I'll be succinct, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Well, I think that's it for my group. Before I invite Dr. Hassinger up here, remember I said there is one way that you can increase the population in the region, so go home and get at it. Thank you.
I just want to add a quick thank you to Jason for his good advice about how we can deal with that demographic issue. And it is my task to let you know that Lunch is right about there right now, I believe. And so what we'd like to do is let you know that we want you to be able to get lunch. It's buffet style. We want you to go ahead, get lunch, come back to the tables, and particularly because during lunch, after we get settled and we get everybody back in place, we'd like to introduce Jason Beskey. And Jason has a positive and enthusiastic message for us about how we can deal with a number of our forces of change with actions that are familiar to and understood by the planning community, but can be better understood by a larger number of people and be supported by the work that we do. So at this point, in an orderly fashion, there is a buffet over here, and there is a buffet over here on either side of the room. And if you make your way there, come back to the tables, and we'll keep rolling. We will start the afternoon session after Jason's presentation right at 1 o'clock. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, we want to thank you for coming today to our long-range plan workshop. And right now, I want to introduce Jason Besky. He's an urban planner and designer from Washington, D.C. He's an experienced speaker and educator in urban planning and urban design. He currently serves as adjunct faculty at Virginia Tech's National Capital Planning Region campus. His recent publication, Suburban Remix, Creating the Next Generation of Urban Places, which we have a few copies out front if anybody is interested, examines the rise of walkable urbanism in the new suburban area. He is a former chair of APA's Urban Design and Preservation Division and a board member of the Form-Based Codes Institute. So let's give Jason a warm welcome, and he's going to talk about a lot of things that we talked about this morning and are very relevant to our region. Again, Jason Besky.
All right, thank you. Hopefully you're settled in, got your lunch, and you're prepared for a whirlwind presentation. And so I haven't been to Pittsburgh a lot. I've been through Pittsburgh, on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, and I feel more prepared to be here than ever because I know what it's like to win a Stanley Cup finally. So I applaud the Penguins for, So thank you. All right. So with that, let me talk about the topic of Suburban Remix. And really, and I want to say, let me go back, and I want to say I'm just one of the co-editors of it with David Dixon, who is great, and he's out spreading the word as well about what Suburban Remix is for our next generation of development. One quote that's come up over time is, North America is a suburban continent with an urban population. And with the forces of change and demographic changes, this has never been more true. So most of our land is dedicated to the suburbs, but as you see through demographic changes, most of our population is an urban population. And these two can work together. And what we like to talk about as the Great Reset, I equate to your forces of change, but it's really been a perfect storm of demographics, values, and economic change over the last couple decades. So what this Great Reset, or these forces that are leading us to change in our communities, is offering us is an opportunity to rethink or recalibrate the way we plan our cities, our regions, and the way they're ultimately built from high-level policy all the way down to regulations. If you look back to the turn of the century, this is in New Rochelle, New York. The turn of the century, we had idyllic suburbs that people were fleeing the cities for. And even to the point where you could buy a house for less than what a semester of college costs now. And many of those were kit homes that were spread throughout the country. We also had ubiquitous patterns of sprawl, and they have increasingly dotted the landscape. So anybody out there play SimCity at some point in time over the last couple decades? A few of you. So, as planners, we look at sprawl development as potentially negative or having negative impacts, but if you look at this pattern, this would have been one of the coolest things you could have done on SimCity, right? But all that leads to, moving forward a half a century, is the crisis that we've run into, and part of that was the housing bubble, and to a large degree that was a result of urban sprawl, and that came to a head a decade ago. But fast forward a couple more years, and that once idyllic vision of New Rochelle, New York, has transformed into this as New Rochelle, New York. We have begun to see the paradigm shift that we call the Great Reset, or these forces of change, leading to all of the culmination of the demographics, the values, and the economic changes that we've seen over the decades. It's interesting to look at the shift in values through advertisement over time. This particular ad is from 1960. It's an Aunt Jemima ad for pancake mix. But look at, over time, what our cultural or our ethos was and what the common family sitting around the table looked like. Well, fast forward, or not fast forward yet, but families, so for decades, families with kids dominated the landscape and the suburbs. And over time, though, the promise of suburbia did respond. If you look now at demographic changes and what our common families look like, and in pop culture and in television, that's increasingly different. But it also is increasingly more probably in line with what our culture and our demographics are like. So this is an IKEA ad from 2015, which is more of a common demographic switch than what we've seen in the past. In addition to that, our values are changing. You can see that private cars no longer as much shape lifestyles of growing numbers of Americans. A survey that was given to millennials recently showed that 41% of them, if they had to lose one thing, they would not want to lose their smartphone. I know when I was growing up, being able to jump in my car after high school and drive around with friends was really important to me. We didn't have smartphones, of course, so maybe that would have been different, but what it shows is the shifting values, and particularly in a generation. The millennial generation is the largest generation, larger than baby boomers, and there will be major impacts as that generation continues to age and move into and throughout our cities. Also, another value is a growing personal focus on wellness. If you look at, over time, obesity in this country has grown more and more, but an increasing focus on personal wellness really favors, as we move forward, and I'll get into this a little bit, walkable urban developments. So let me talk about demographic and economic trends that are shaping the future of our cities. You can see, and I'm not going to dive into the statistics, you've seen this through the time with some of these workshops, but really look at the U.S. is growing older and younger. You have the millennials on one end, the baby boomers on the other end, and then you have Gen Xers like me stuck in the middle. But our communities are growing older and younger at the same time, and what does that mean for households? Well, the U.S. is undersupplied right now with multifamily housing, and that's a result of what the households are looking like. Less people are having children, families are smaller. Higher income families, and I'm assuming you've seen this to a degree, and some urban populations are moving into cities, and property values within cities are increasing. So, but as you see that, you also see some disparities. There has been an urban imperative driven by the growth of the knowledge economy over the last couple decades. And then when I say urban, urban also means walkable suburban, so a walkable urban development. But the U.S. is adding fewer new workers. As we've discussed today, workers can be difficult to come by. It's creating a knowledge worker shortage. As our economies change and our industries change, we need to retrain those workers to do these new knowledge jobs that are going to be in so much demand. College-educated 26 to 46-year-olds are moving to cities. So that also impacts the growth of our cities and the value of the properties in our cities, because you have this demand. And then finally, urban office values are rising faster than in cities. Per square foot, urban office and walkable suburban office by far exceeds what you're seeing in a typical suburban office setting. So that's ripe for redevelopment of some of these urban office parks. Like we're seeing in Washington, D.C., we're seeing a lot of, and this is typically along transit lines, but you're seeing a lot of change in the way these office parks are developed. This reminds me of one of the strategies we talked about earlier, and that is the demographic strategy. And that is encouraging employers to better align their requirements with the workforce demands. And that is some of those demands in the workforce and with those knowledge economy workers, they're looking for amenity-rich developments, ones that are walkable. So this is just one way that you can impact the jobs in an economy is by having environments where the workers want to be and they feel comfortable being, that they will seek. All of this has unfolded during this era, and then there's three key areas I want to talk about. One of those is the growing economic disparities, and that is income disparities are growing. So while people are starting to make more and more, there's people who are making less as well, and that's not changing. There's been generational poverty persisting throughout our communities. So it's part of that is being able to train people to lift them out of the poverty and create more of a level playing field. Also, growth alone will not cure this, so the community can grow, but you also need to have your policies in the right place so that you can help to start addressing some of the equity issues and the poverty issues. One of the table speakers earlier said that social equity is of fundamental value, and I couldn't agree more with that. I think that should underlie a lot of what occurs with any regional or local planning initiative. With that in mind, that all the way from bringing people to the table to hear their voices, to policies and regulations that are favorable to everybody is extremely important. So essentially, what you're seeing is that poverty and wealth are trading places. Where wealth used to be in the suburbs, and if you had enough money, you could move away from the city to live in the suburbs, you're now moving back to the city to a large degree, and a lot of the poverty is moving out to the suburbs. So there's been this change. And so what we're looking at is how do we equitably put suburbs forward, residential development models that embrace everybody. The next piece is the dramatic changes to the retail markets. We all know what's happening with retail, with the e-tailing and online. Amazon has 40% of the online retail sales, which is just massive, and they've barely touched brick and mortar sales. Just wait and see what happens. But so, as a result of the diminishing retail environment that we've seen, dead and dying malls are persisting. Strip malls a lot of them are in decline. What you're seeing to pull people to some of these retail developments is food and fun. So you're seeing restaurants, you're seeing outdoor seating, activities, programming that are taking the place of what used to be a robust retail environment that no longer exists as we knew it. And then finally, rapid and dramatic technological changes. We've talked about that as far as autonomous vehicles are concerned, but to be prepared for this is going to be of utmost importance. I would say, and I looked at the strategies under the technology strategy, deploying infrastructure for autonomous and connected vehicles is going to be huge. And part of that is it's not insular. You're going to need the technologies in 5G and whatnot to do that. But the regions and the communities that start planning for autonomous vehicles now are going to far exceed what success levels other communities that do not. And what does that look like? Mobility revolution is coming, and it's coming sooner than we think. If I remember correctly in what I've read, there's been testing in the Pittsburgh area with autonomous vehicles, and you'll continue to see that. But it won't necessarily look like this Tesla here. What it's going to look like is this called Ollie. It's in a manufacturer, but this is a shared autonomous vehicle. We will have autonomous vehicles, but if we all buy an autonomous vehicle like we have a vehicle now, that's not going to help our traffic congestion in our problems. It's going to make life easier for us, but what's really going to change our communities and the way we get around and start to impact the environment is shared autonomous vehicles. And so Ollie is a shared autonomous vehicle. And one of the issues you see, and I thought this was very interesting, so I'll drill down on it in a second. If you look at the picture on the right, you can see the eyeballs on this shared autonomous, this SAV. Well, one of the issues you're having when you have human intelligence and you have machine intelligence, they don't necessarily communicate. So in testing, one of the issues they were having when someone would try to cross the road and there was no driver in a car, there was no trust between this human and this autonomous vehicle. So coming up with technologies such as what's called googly eyes, which will follow someone and at least let you know that this technology is seeing you. So there's a whole trust issue that we need to build up around this as well. I can't imagine the first time I ride in one of these things, and I've never done this before. It's going to be quite a trip, I suppose. So looking at autonomous vehicles, or shared autonomous, it's going to really impact how we get around and how we connect with our surrounding community. First, we have the amenity dividend. This is downtown Washington, D.C., and it's looking a little washed out. But anyway, the circle is a 5-minute walk, a quarter-mile circle. And this is, what is accessible on foot for a lot of people who are willing to walk a quarter mile or 5 minutes. But what shared autonomous vehicles are going to do is really expand what that amenity is to a much larger area, making convenience for us as people much easier, but also helping any retailers or amenity spaces throughout the area attract a larger clientele. There's the public realm dividend. So just looking at a quick street section, if you're not a planner or engineer, I apologize. But this is a typical street section on top of 6 lanes, a couple lanes for parking. But what we're going to be able to do when we have shared autonomous vehicles or CAV is really start to reclaim a lot of our public realm. And you look at any given city, and about 25% of that city is streets or public space. And what we're going to be able to do is start claiming back some of that public space for wider sidewalks, medians with street trees, bike lanes, alternative mobility options. So it will take that standard section and really shrink that down and start to give us space back in our communities that we can use for people and placemaking. There's the density dividend. What one SAV can do is eliminate 11 parking spaces in a community. It can carry 31 to 41 people a day. And then it also can remove 12 vehicles from our roadways. So once we get into shared autonomous vehicles, and I think I will be an early adopter, we're really going to start to free up space in our communities, not only for the public realm. Think about all the parking garages that can be retrofitted or redeveloped. This particular parking garage, do we convert redundant parking into low-value office potentially, or housing, or an urban distribution center, such as this, which, it's great that we can take something that was parking and use it for something, or in our communities, do we turn it into more high-value density that provides life on the street, urban vitality, and fiscal benefits. So we will be able to take some of these areas that have been dedicated to parking and vehicles that really don't give you any tax revenue and really extract from that in some of our built-up communities when we do retrofit these garages. And let me move on to the placemaking dividend. So I'll finish this out, and the last part here is about placemaking. And so as a planner, I'm also interested in the social side of placemaking. And from a social perspective, placemaking is really guided by the belief that the social aspects and personal well-being are of utmost importance in a community. And then you have the physical aspects, which is a tool for either marketing an idea, a development, or the act of designing or creating places where people want to be. But I try to look at placemaking, and we talk about this in the book as we talk about developments, but it's really kind of both the physical and social. It's really the act of creating places, both physically and socially, and bringing people together, bringing together a diversity of interest to impart places of lasting value. And when I think of the forces of change process that this area is going through, ultimately what we want to get down to is creating places of lasting value. And I think all of these things move to that, in creating places, and places that people want to be, they're enriched, they're places that are economically successful. That's kind of what I see, is really let's create places of lasting value. And if you have that as your goal, everything else we can kind of plug in along the way. You could say in the dictum of Gertrude Stein, placemaking puts the there there. And that's what I call placemaking. So you have the physical placemaking framework. Those are the streets in circulation. Those are the public open spaces. Those are our buildings and the architecture in our communities. But I'm also going to talk about some of the characteristics that fall under that physical framework. And that's walkability, connectivity, a multi-layered public realm, a diverse mix of choices, and then authenticity, which I think is key. So, talking about streets in circulation, these are the roads, it's the transit, it's the trails, it's the bike share. These are ways to get around our communities. I would say this area, the streets in circulation in our communities and in our regions, this area has the most potential to help us move away from sprawl development patterns that have really eaten up our land over time and help create more walkable developments. I look at the environmental strategy that we were looking at today, and one of those is to support sustainable growth in walkable communities. I would say, along with placemaking, and important in placemaking, I think, is creating a walkable community. But if we can have walkability and connectivity to the larger region in mind while we're doing this, that is going to be one of the key pieces moving forward. So when I talk about walkability, it's really just the ability to walk. It's the desire, it's the be able to use it, the ease of use, it's comfort. And then, like I mentioned, our policies and regulations from local governments on up can really play a key role in impacting walkability. Connectivity, it's how a development or a downtown or a main street connects with itself, with maybe a street grid or trail system or a transit system that allows people to reach this location. So it's both internal and external connection, it's regional connection, and it's also addresses a myriad of modes. And this is just a quick look at, these are a couple suburbs that we analyzed in the book. Bethesda in Bethesda Row in Maryland, and then Reston Town Center in Reston, Virginia. You can see that these are tight development patterns and a grid network of streets that really affects the internal connectivity. But what these two places also have going for it are their ability to connect externally through the metro rail system and a robust bus system throughout the area. I will say, talking about downtowns, not all market demand will be able to be satisfied in city centers. So as you look at Washington, D.C., for example, if anybody ever flown into Washington and what you see when you're flying in, and this really jumped out at me the first time I went to Washington, was, yeah, there's downtown, it's low lying because of the height limits, but you look around the region and you see these dots of density, and these dots of density are on rail systems, but the city center in and of itself may not be able to satisfy what market demand is coming, but we have these suburban city centers, per se, that will also that will be able to help with that and create walkable places that are amenity rich that people will enjoy. This is a framework. Tyson's, if you're familiar with Tyson's, the consummate edge city, but this is an office area outside of Washington, D.C., about 15 miles, 10, 15 miles, right on the Beltway. Tyson's over the years, and it grew up as sprawl was the mantra, but it's a 2,100 acre area. It has 90,000 jobs, only 19,000 residents, and 36 million square feet of non-residential development. In 2010, this is in Fairfax County, Virginia, the county passed a plan for Tyson's area that would, by 2050, increase the jobs to 200,000 jobs, residents to 100,000 residents, to make this more of a mixed-use, walkable area. To accommodate that growth, that new zoning that came in was done in concert with a grid plan for connectivity throughout the area. This is a $3.1 billion plan for roads and transit, and the county will fund itself. Will fund neighborhood improvements such as sidewalks, bus and transit routes, and things of the like. But what will happen is redevelopment's happening now. That redevelopment is going to fund, until 2050, that street grid of $3.1 billion, half by a tax in a special district, and then half based on construction rates for residential and non-residential development. So as a partnership, the county is working together with developers to make sure this happens, because it's going to be of utmost importance. You look at a $3.1 billion price tag, it's hefty, but you look at the potential this area has to bring tax revenue and create walkable communities, it's unparalleled in this country right now. And just to show a couple pictures, this is 1936 Tyson's Corner. Just a corner store at the intersection of two roads. This is 1993, and there were color photographs in 93, but I want to, okay. And then this is 2013. The new Silver Line of the metro system in DC came through Tyson's Corner with 4 stops, and you can see the ancillary development is really kicking up in 2003. And then today, it continues to persist. Cranes are all around, really responding to the forces of change in the area and what people are demanding. Workplaces are creating amenities. There's public spaces. There's reasons for people to want to work here. And that's part of, and to retain some of those workers, those knowledge workers, that there's competition throughout, from Silicon Valley all the way to downtown DC, there is competition. So how are you going to attract those knowledge workers? And that's by putting and you'll see employers going where they want, their workers want them to be, but it's really providing the opportunity for them to have the setting that they're looking for, sorry. All right, let me move on to public and open space. This is that second area of the construct of placemaking, the physical construct of placemaking. And this is a picture of Reston Town Center. Right here you can see the pavilion. Just a quick anecdote. The plan for Reston Town Center came out decades ago, and all along specified we need to have a cultural amenity, a museum in the middle of this plaza. You can see the pavilion now. Over time, what happens is that pavilion started to be used by the residents and it really became part of what Reston Town Center was. And over time, the whole idea of a museum or cultural amenity went away. So it was the fact that they didn't try to cram something that they thought on paper might be a good idea, but really responded to what the people wanted. And this is just one quick example of that. So looking further at Reston Town Center, one of the characteristics within public and open space that I think is important is really having a multi-layered public realm. And looking down Reston Town Center, you can see I'm over on the left screen here. The Market Street comes straight down, but along there's a series of plazas and open spaces that really weave itself together to create a multi-layered public realm and give people different experiences throughout a development. This is just an aerial of that. A multifunctional public realm is a second characteristic. So a multi-layer gives you multiple opportunities in one large area, but multifunctional is taking a park like Reston Town Square Park, for example, and giving people opportunities. This is a 1.25 acre area park. But if you look and break it down, it has 7 distinct areas. And any given time I go there, you see these different types. There's a splash fountain here, there's a contemplative area over here, or public art over here. These places get used constantly, and one thing I see is that it's any age range. This place is really accommodates the multi-use concept in one area. And suburbs really start to need to tap into their authenticity and what they have to deal with. This is Lake Ann in Reston, and very suburban, but it was the first village center in Reston, and it really drew upon what was authentic about this area, and that was the water body and what was built as the plaza around that. One important thing to keep in mind in doing this is that this is in Arlington County, Virginia, is that think about open and public spaces throughout the year. Particularly in Pittsburgh here, where it gets cold, you need to think about winter and summer cities. But a summer use of this particular development differs greatly from the winter use. But what they did in designing this is ensure that people would use the space 12 months out of the year, and it's been very vibrant. Programming is key to that. I mean, you can design something, but you also need to really put an emphasis on programming events that your local community members want to participate in. And then the final construct, and I'm not going to dive into this too much, other than to say that about buildings, land use, and architecture, that when we are creating walkable developments and retrofitting suburbs, and let me digress just a second, one thing I feel is important is that, and we talk about this in the book, is you can change suburbs, and suburbs can change to be more walkable. A lot of people don't want them to change. They like what they are. But I would say you don't have to change a blade of grass on your property in the suburbs to introduce walkable development. If you look across the American landscape, we have dozens upon dozens of malls and strip malls that are dead and dying. We have golf courses that are failing. These are all land banks that suburban communities can use for future development. And so I think that's important. And in doing that, those future development, the placement of buildings, the use of the buildings, and the use mixture of the buildings is really important. Density is also important. I would say for any of this development, density is a threshold requirement to attract a walkable, or create a walkable development. And just a rule of thumb, 1,000 to 2,000 residential units can contribute to about 1 block of Main Street retail, maybe about 50,000 square feet. So that's something to keep in mind, that you can spread these strip malls out, but if you were to focus a development and want to create a walkable development that excites people, it doesn't take a lot to do that. And just looking quickly at, this is the Tyson's land use map that I talked about that overlays on the grid, but those 4 stops that come through Tyson's, there was a hyper focus on what the activities, the land use activities, the densities, actually there's no height limits in this area. That could take place around these transit stops. But they focused on transit stops and creating walkable community, but also creating the ability to access other places within the region. And one of the last characteristics is a diverse mix of choices. This is in Rockville, Maryland. Creating a diverse mix of choices refers to allowing all people to participate from all economic levels. in activities or programming or cultural amenities that a community may have to offer. And that's something not to forget as you move forward with your forces of change and your strategies. Always remember what this area is known for and try to keep that alive as you put forward future development plans for this area. What's really exciting about Rockville here is that part of this public-private partnership, this used to be a mall area and parking lot, and Rockville incorporated a art innovation center. There's a big artist community there, and they use that as what makes them authentic and helps them to have a diverse mix of choices for their residents. And then the final characteristic is authenticity, and this is last couple slides I'm going to end on. And you probably never heard it. I only hear it because I say it, but the words authentic and suburb rarely appear in the same sentence. It just appeared in that sentence, but rarely do. Authenticity refers to strategies that really capture local spirit. In this case, this is Shirlington. This is Arlington, Virginia. And it was an early adopter of creating a walkable Main Street that had parking lots around it, but it created a place for people to come. But today in Shirlington, you see dozens and dozens of local shops and restaurants, which really create a local feel. But you also see a library and a community art theater that has been really the linchpin of creating an authentic experience. So it makes Shirlington authentically Shirlington. And so I'll end on this slide by saying that overall placemaking is really about a community seeking to inject their own histories and cultural traditions. It's about creating places of lasting value, which I hope this whole forces of change process really can rest on, is that you're creating places of lasting value. It's really giving shape and character to the places we create. This particular story, this is in Lake Ann in Virginia, in Reston. And the statue here of is Robert E. Simon. He was the founder of Reston. Reston, Robert E. Simon. You can kind of put that together. But Robert E. Simon was telling me a story one day about, he used to live in this area. He's now passed. He was 100 years old. And he was walking by the statue one day, and a statue of himself. And there was a family such as this sitting there watching, playing. And the mom introduced Robert E. Simon and said, "Hey, that's the guy that's the statue's made of." And the daughter just couldn't grasp it. She looks at the statue and looks at Robert and then looks at her mom and it's like, how did he get out of it? So all that is to say that let's give character to the developments we create. Let's think about creating place, but let's think about doing it in a smart manner that is equitable for all people that we're planning for. So with that, I thank you and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. I'll turn it back to Jim. All right.
Jason, I want to thank you again for the examples, the thinking, and presenting us with opportunity to make things happen, which take advantage of examples that you've provided to us. And remind people that the book is available and on Amazon, and there's a lot of interesting lessons there, much more than we had time to talk about today. So we appreciate your time. I want to pass along to you a token of our appreciation from another author who's written great things, whose name might be David McCullough. And thank you again. And let's give him another round, please.
Thank you.
Jason has to get moving pretty promptly this afternoon back to D.C., batten down the hatches. But thanks again. I think what we're going to do, turn quickly to Lou Velati, who will introduce what we're going to do during this next session on the forces of change and the strategies to deal with various scenarios related to those forces. Lou, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We have one more exercise. This morning, we did the work that all stemmed from the first expert resource panel meeting, where they looked at the force of change and looked at additional forces within that primary force and said which ones are the most urgent to work on. Well, the second meeting, they looked at the development of strategies on how do we impact those things. I think we talked about a little bit here this morning. Someone said it's all based on policy. Well, you look at some of the strategies on how we can impact those things we presented today. So one of the ways that we did that is based upon the discussion that took place at the first meeting. There was an exploratory scenario developed for each of the items underneath the primary scenario. So what I'm going to do is and this morning we talked about economy, and within economy we talked about one of the items or the topics being energy. So there was based upon the discussion that took place with that group, an exploratory scenario was developed. And it said that the energy sector, buoyed by the shale gas investment, becomes a driving force in the regional economy. This exacerbates an already tight labor market. There is inadequate investment in sites and infrastructure needed to attract and grow related industries and businesses that could be drawn by ever-decreasing energy costs. And at the same time, the region continues to struggle to minimize the environmental impacts. So what are we looking at? We asked them to do is using that exploratory scenario, have the panel work to develop some draft strategies that deal with that particular issue. So in this case, we looked at, they came up with, some of them are very simple or very self-evident strategies. The first being support the Appalachian Storage Hub, promote common sense regulations that protect the environment but allows the energy industry to prosper, and provide flexible and easy to use funding for on-the-job training in the workforce section geared towards emerging technologies. And some of them require a little more detail. So this one is, promote local utilization of energy and industry output. So we had to go into a little more explanation with that. And what does that mean? Focus on the attraction of high energy users, potentially the point of source energy users. Focus on natural gas liquid and downstream users. Develop information on basic site requirements for these industries. And then have the quasi-public development organizations take the lead in site development. Strategies like this were developed for each of the forces and each of the items within the primary force. So here comes your next exercise, or the last exercise of the day. At your table, you will each have strategies identified for just one of the forces of change. We don't have time to take you through this. We do, if you want to stay here till 5 o'clock, but we don't want to do that to you. You don't have time to go through all of these, so we give each of the table one force of change. And all of these topics are important. We understand that, but at the same point in time, we don't have unlimited resources. So there needs to be a strategy to think about or use some sort of initiative to look at how we can invest. How should we invest our money? So in this case, what you have at each table, there are, along with that particular force of change, and you'll have a sheet that looks like this. You'll each be given one. You'll have the force of the change on the top. You'll have the subset of that force of change underneath and the number of strategies there. You also have 20 dots that each represent $5 or $100. You have to, as a table, come to consensus on how to invest that money across those sets of strategies. All right, so, and then what we'll do is as we come through the end of that, on that investment, we'll go around and we'll just choose one table for each of those forces to tell us how they invested their money. All right, so has everyone kind of got where we're headed at? And while you only have, let me just say also, as while you only have the one, this is a reason to stick around, because we're not putting them out yet. Even though you only get one set of strategies for one particular force, at the end of today's event, as you walk out the door, outside will be the strategies for all of the forces so that you'll be able to take those home with you and be able to take a look at it. Okay? So with that, let's let the games begin. We have 5 minutes. We may go long a little. Some people are done though. Do you have a 2-minute slide or just a 5? Do you have a 2-minute slide? discussion. So spend your money now. Okay. I hope you've all invested your money wisely, because we're all going to require you to leave that amount of money on the table as you leave. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go around, and Andy's been going around. He's been talking to some of the tables. I know that Abby's been talking to some of the tables. So we're going to try and bring at least one representative up from each of the 5 forces of change to talk about how they invested. So, yes, the first one, please. So tell us where you invested and why, and what your force was, please.
So our force was the...
Wait till you get to the microphone.
Sorry, our force was the economy. And within economy, we had workforce strategies, infrastructure strategies, technology strategies, energy strategies, and vacant property strategies. So I'll hold this up so you guys have an idea of what ours looks like.
Great, thank you.
And so our table decided that our priorities, the strategy that we wanted to prioritize within that were infrastructure strategies and particularly vacant property strategies. And so we put 2 of our dots in each of the vacant property strategies, and then emphasized within that prioritizing repurposing versus demolition, and how to really make use of the buildings and housing stock that we have, so that we retain the character of the community and integrate history into development moving forward. As well as developing and promoting and duplicating best practice models like land trusts, land banks, municipal ordinances, beautification, and stabilization programs. So within vacant property strategies, which was our primary focus of investment, the prioritizing repurposing versus demolition, and developing and duplicating best practice models. And then the next priority for us was infrastructure strategies. We put 3 dots on increasing funding for critical infrastructure, and 2 dots on improving the efficiency in development, design, construction, operation, and maintenance. And then 1 dot each on the rest of them. And then within workforce strategy, then for each of the other ones, workforce, technology strategies, and energy strategies, we prioritize 1 out of each of them for our remaining dots. Under workforce strategies, we looked at, there was a lot of conversation about breaking the negative stigma of skilled blue-collar label versus college, and changing training curriculum and delivery paradigm to focus on soft skills while also providing industry-specific training, and we felt like those went hand in hand. That being said, the change training curriculum and delivery paradigm to focus on soft skills while also providing industry-specific training. The last part of that sentence was training funding to the employers, and we crossed that out because we believe that it is on the employer's responsibility to sort of identify and sometimes make their investments in their own companies, in their own field to train their employers. And so that was our focus point pending the edit there. Our focus under technology strategies was pushing high-speed deployment through public policy, particularly on the regulatory side of it, not so much on the carrot side of it of funding or incentives. A lot of these things incentivize themselves because of market forces. And then within energy strategies, promoting common sense regulations that protect the environment but allow the industry to prosper. And that looks at sort of city interests and rural interests. We all share the environment. And particularly because this is sort of a public or government oriented gathering, we're looking at, what can we do to move that forward, but also speak to all of our interests in the room.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. And yeah, please, by all means, please. And do we have the next?
Okay, good afternoon. We had technology forces of change, and we put basically, based on our priorities is where we put our funding. The majority, just show this around the room, the majority of our funding went to the broadband strategies. And again, we put that as our top priority, looking at the rural areas, looking at the 5G network. So we have a majority of the funding there. And basically that's to use existing transportation corridors to facilitate delivery of broadband throughout the region. Now we also thought that funding for broadband could ultimately fund a lot of these other items as well, such as automated and connected vehicle strategies. You need the broadband to get these vehicles in place, even the P3 and some of these other priorities. Moving to our second priority would be mobility as a service strategy. This was to integrate multiple forms of public-private transportation to equitably provide increased mobility for all users. That was a second priority just because there's a lot of opportunity now with funding in the P3 arena. Some of the latest funding strategies involve P3. So that was the second of our priorities. And then we moved down to additive manufacturing strategies. That's the retraining of workers as needed to accommodate additive manufacturing, addressing impacts of supply chain restructuring. So we had some priorities there as well to pretty much to train those folks already in the workforce to get them up to speed with technology. And then also, lastly, I'll mention artificial intelligence strategies. That's to retrain, develop new workers as needed, and then identify how transportation agencies can better use artificial intelligence. So that would be the training to get workers up to speed with certain robotics, and then those workers losing jobs, such as tool facility workers, to get them the training they need as well. So again, our funding sort of lied with our priorities, which was, again, broadband and mobility.
Great, thank you. Okay. And next, we have someone getting up.
Good afternoon. We had the environmental forces of change. And so our strategy really was to identify what we thought was the strategy with the most oomph in each strategy underneath of the 5 categories. Natural resources on this sheet was broken out into natural resources and air quality, so we actually had 6. So going through each one, we identified what we thought would have the most impact, starting with climate change strategies. And we thought that increasing capacity of stormwater collection and retention systems to accommodate future projected increases in extreme precipitation events was going to be really important in Pittsburgh. So we put $10 there. For land use, there were only 2 strategies, so we colored outside the lines a little bit here and put $5 towards a strategy development team, as well as $20 to provide municipal education on land use best practices, community development, and transportation planning. There's 130 municipalities in Allegheny County, so that's a lot of people to get on the same page. We think it's really important to make sure that education's available so that people can get involved. And then we also put $5 towards smart growth principles and traditional neighborhood development concepts to create livable communities on the local and neighborhood level. But really focusing here that we think that there are better strategies out there, and so we did have that strategy development team that we were investing in. On energy strategies, we think that incentivizing the development and deployment of alternate fuels and renewable sources of energy provides the most sustainable and impactful change of the strategies we were provided. And for water strategies, we put $20 towards promoting sustainable regional water resource management and planning. I think that's going to be important. It's really wet here and getting wetter. For natural resource strategies and air quality strategies, we kind of put those back together, and this was something we thought was hugely important. So we colored outside the lines again here and put $10 towards what we thought was a better strategy of enforcement for things that were detrimental to making things better. So rather than just incentivizing positive changes, which we did with $10 to support and develop mitigation planning efforts, as well as $10 to support and encourage transportation projects and programs that will contribute to attainment or maintenance of the national ambient air quality standards, we also wanted to put $10 towards creating some sort of enforcement for people who aren't upholding that, so that that change could be impactful.
Okay, thank you very much. We have two left, funding and demographics. Let's do funding next. Please.
Okay, we had the funding forces of change. And what we realized going through the exercise is that you can't turn away any dollar, whether it's regional or public or private or philanthropic. We just couldn't turn away dollars in the strategies. So you'll see, if you look at our board, that we pretty much give a dot to just about everything. If it's generating support and funding for improving infrastructure in the region, we couldn't turn it away and say it had higher value. But we did offer a double funding or double dots to working consistently with the state legislature, just to inform them of the need and that it's a continuing process, and that it's not all in one process, but it's many different types of approaches and strategies for funding our infrastructure and needs. We also gave triple dots to funding with user-based transportation revenue systems and new revenues. And the last thing I'd say is as we were going through this, we were thinking there's more detail needed in the strategy. And so we can help with that as a table or whatever, but just some of the detail in this was missing. But.
Thank you. And we do have, thank you very much. And in our reports, we do have reports that are available online that are summaries of both the meeting 1 and meeting 2 of the expert resource panel. And what you will find in that case is there are a number of there is more detail associated with each of the strategies in those reports. But for this case, just to try to keep it for this comment, we tried to. But again, point well taken, and we hope to move forward and fill those out with the help from everybody in this room. So, Joe, I see you standing there. I think the light shines right in your eyes.
Somehow we have a duplication here because our table also had funding forces of change. So.
Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah, but I'll keep it simple and short. Basically, we spent $150. We did what the federal and the state government do. Give us 100, we spent 150, kick the can down the road. But anyhow, we too, like the last group, had dots on, a wide variety of categories because, they're interdependent and they're important in so many ways to so many people. Two of the big areas that we prioritized, however, was garner private sector, nonprofit, and especially public understanding of public infrastructure needs and subsequent support for increased infrastructure revenues, because too many people don't know, too many people don't understand what our needs are, or they don't want to understand, and somehow we have to engage them, we have to get their attention, and let them understand somehow that these investments are for them and for our future generations. And the other thing was work consistently with the state legislature, 3 dots for that one too. Realizing that our infrastructure are not D roads, bridges, sewers, and water lines, and public transit, but there are issues too. So they don't carry the Republican-Democrat lines. And you know, we had a little bubble on one of the other charts that said legislative dysfunction. That has to come to an end. We need to come together because we're all here for the same reason. We're all stakeholders, and infrastructure is so vital to the future of southwestern Pennsylvania, as well as the state and the nation. So we need to work on those things.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And one last one. I believe it's demographics. I always get lost, but I'm pretty sure demographics is the last one we have left.
So I'm the pinch hitter, the backup quarterback, and okay, I'm Joe West from Beaver County. We had the demographics at our table, and we had 4 topics: transportation, land use, population trends, and job strategies. So one we put a lot of emphasis on was job strategies. As you can see, we put a lot of dots on that. The 2 things under there was growth and attractive variety of industries to diversify jobs across the region. Another one we had a lot of dots on was encourage employees to offer better employment benefits package. There's some municipalities across the country, one of the things they are doing to attract young people, and a lot of corporations are, they're paying like giving them a down payment for their mortgage, or they're paying the first couple of years of their student loans to attract them in. So they're starting to think out of the box a lot of places around the country in order to attract young people, and those are a couple of things they are doing. Another thing that we looked at also was reintegrate individuals in the workforce with minor criminal records and drug use, because we have an opium problem and anything like that. You have to somehow get those people trained, get them back in the workforce and everything to resolve that problem. There's 2 more things on that. We had to match college graduates to available jobs and train and match workers to jobs we have in the region. We put a dot on both of those because we thought that was very important to make sure you have the jobs available for the young people when they graduate out of college, and also make sure we train workers to match the new jobs. We actually spent half our budget on job strategies. The other ones we spread it out as far as transportation strategies, focus on developing a comprehensive regional plan for public transportation. We even mentioned about having a metropolitan or combined transportation system. Under land use, of course, we brought up affordable housing for all, and also educate local governments the best land use practices. And under population trends, again, we have to encourage domestic migrations. We got to stop this the slow decline in population in the area. So we have to we said that's something that we have to invest in to see how can we retain young people to stay here, and also and have employers just realign themselves with national standards to be more competitive to attract workers. So that's how we spent our other half our budget, and that was for the demographics.
All right, thank you, Joe. And I want to thank you all for doing this exercise. It's very helpful. We'll be looking to, and you can be looking in the near future for a very similar survey, much like the first MetroQuest survey that went out, that will ask you to do, and others in the entire region, based upon the input we receive from you today, to do this, help us decide where that investment goes. Now, with that, I want to turn this over back over to Jim Hassinger for the close.
Hey, let's all thank Lou for this exercise. And again, I just want to say again how much we appreciate your participation through this process. And it's very encouraging. This is really very encouraging to hear both the depth of understanding that people have about these issues, the thinking about priorities, the ability to converse across the table, and sometimes when there are different ideas about what to do, to come to some consensus, which is what we need when we move forward on anything. We'll be continuing through the planning process as we go forward. Do we have something a little more specific on that? The SPC is going to continue to develop these force of change reports. Public meetings in each county are going to be scheduled in the next couple of months. We're working on that right now. And so there'll be an announcement there. You'll probably very likely to hear from, I'm sure you're going to hear from our staff about the next set of meetings that'll be in each of our counties and here right in Pittsburgh. This timeline that you see on the screen is we're about in the middle of it. We see September 2018 Regional Policy Conference, which this is that. And then planned public meetings. We do have this process geared to construction of and publish in draft form and adopted by our commission by June of next year. So we're working our way toward that, and this is a big milestone in the development of that plan. We will be back on, as Lou said, we'll have new survey work to do to follow on here. We'll call on you again. And I also wanted to make sure that I did not leave here without thanking our own staff, which you had an opportunity to meet at the tables today. Can you help me give them a hand? You've done great work, and we'll be back again. Thank you very much.